what we are building towards is kind of this concept of a new UI for the product, right? Just think about how much these large companies invest in their mobile app or their website, and this is just literally how everyone communicates with them. So this could be a way where eventually the way any user interacts with any brand is through an AI agent.
Perhaps an interesting place to begin, I bet you don't expect this, is for you to tell us a little bit about the phrase that you've talked about that's written on your wall in the office.
There's no challenge that can't be overcome, and there's no enemy that can't be defeated. We just like it. I think it really fits our culture. People there we have a very competitive team. Everyone wants to win. We have a lot of energy when we're trying to go out and build, because it just feels like, hey, there's all this stuff happening in the industry. Like, we have such a strong team. Let's just go and win. Motivated by, my dad told me this. I don't know if this is actually validated or not, but at Huawei in China, there's obviously a massive company, but they're known for just having like killer culture. And they have some version of this written in Chinese, of course, like in just big red letters across the back of the big hall. So yeah, really like that. And it's kind of interesting. Like, any time that someone walks in, it like stands out. The quote stands out.
I asked about it to begin because I'd love to spend some time on just what this environment is like, building a company like yours against formidable competitors in probably the most exciting era of technology that any of us will ever live through. And words like this, defeated, I've heard the word violence recently about a company culture, aggression. Like these are not words that were being used 3 years ago or 4 years ago. In fact, if you used them, it was a big problem for you. And obviously that has completely shifted. And not only have founders started using these words, but like I think talent and senior people are like rallied around them. Like they want to be in a culture that is defeating enemies or violent or aggressive. So maybe just riff for a while on what it's like to be building and competing in one of the big areas in your case, conversational AI, et cetera, at this moment in time, because it's just so different than it was a couple of years ago.
Our whole view is that any space that's worth going after, like any large hot market, it's going to be competitive. And this is not really specific to AI, right? If you think about Databricks versus Snowflake or Ramp versus Brex, and it's like anytime there's these big, massive growth opportunities, like people are rational, they want to go after it. Yeah, it is exciting, but of course, everyone knows it is competitive, right? Because if there is market, then everyone's trying to build it. It's quite easy to start a company these days. You can raise funding really easily, and so when you go out there, you have to have a pretty deep understanding of like what your competitive advantages are. And one of those could be the culture. And if you build a good culture, that's pretty hard to replicate. It also kind of lasts quite a long time. And to your point, if you have a culture where everyone is really geared towards just like succeeding and working hard and having some level of intensity, it can go a long way. So yeah, and then I think to your point of sort of a lot of companies adopting similar mindsets, I do think from my observation, this generation of company building has attracted like almost like my demographic of person, where it's just like people that grew up in fairly like competitive environments, academics or whatever. And a lot of these founders have done well, right? Like did a lot of math contests and coding contests growing up, and a lot of the people around my age are doing startups now, and people are doing quite well. And I think there is some element of like, hey, if you really embrace this sort of like hardcore like lifestyle or environment growing up, then yeah, I think it lends itself pretty well to the current situation, because there's a lot of parallels.
I was with Scott Wu from Cognition recently, who is well known to be like one of these math champions, you as well. Talk about that environment. Like, what was that competitive market like? What was it? Kind of let people into that world, because obviously it shaped you a lot.
When you look back, just like now that we're all grown up, it is kind of like a pretty intense way to grow up. But I think I look back on my childhood with very fond memories. It's like you get a really nice community, a lot of people that are kind of doing the same thing. I grew up in Colorado, in Boulder. And so Boulder's a pretty academic town, but there's not very many people that are like super gunning for like, these contests or like performing and a lot of my friends had just kind of grew up in, not the places you would think, right? Like California, Texas, New York. And so it gives you some level of community of like, okay, there's a lot of other people out there that are kind of doing the same things as you, and you kind of meet a lot of them. And then now that we're all grown up, those relationships have lasted for a long time. But yeah, the environment is one where it's like, it's like similar to company building. You're like how well you're doing is like fairly objective. There's a lot that has to go into it. There's a lot of preparation, a lot of just like having the feeling of it is like a long-term thing, but because your results are fairly objective, there's just constant motivation to improve. And so I think that's quite nice. One of my big theses is that there's a lot of untapped potential there, and to actually like turning them into people that want to do business or companies and things like that. A lot of them have historically gone into trading or academia, and I mean those are perfectly like awesome jobs, but it's more of like a lot of the folks here. What the sort of this background is correlated to one where it's a little bit more like risk averse and kind of just like get your good grades and like follow a track. And if you can kind of divert some of that talent into like company building, I think there's just a lot that can be done.
What are the parallels? Like what was it? What is it about the people or the training or the specific aptitude in the competitions that make you good at company building and others good at company building? Like this seems like an obvious true trend that there's enough sample size now of people that had this background that are doing extremely well in this environment. Maybe it's the best, if you could somehow index that group of people, you'd have like fantastic performance right now. What is it? Like what is it? What are the parallels that make that true?
So, I mean, one is the competitive nature that we just talked about. The other is just like the problem solving, right? So I think one thing that I believe very strongly is that one of the best things you can do when you're building a company or anything is just like have pretty good introspection on where your strengths are. And at least for this sort of group, it's more on the problem solving side, just like really figuring out, and the problem could be very vague, right? The problem could be like, how do I build a successful company? And you kind of break down the problem. You can like think really critically and just from first principles of a lot of these markets. And of course, that's not the only way to build a company. Like other people, I think some people just have like very good intuition, especially on these like PLG type like things. In general, I think just the problem solving capability, like what these contests really teach you is like you're just solving problems, right? And those problems, of course, are not like real problems in real life, but the sort of thinking is the same.
Does it feel more emotional now, company building, than it did in the contests?
I'm a bit older now, so it's not really that emotional. I started a company before this that was, I would say, way tougher than the current one. I think just like mentally it makes you feel a lot more calm and honestly like appreciative of when things are going well. And timing matters a lot, right? I graduated a year early to try to start it. And I would say we had a very fortunate outcome, but the whole journey was like very bumpy. Like,
what was it? What did it do?
So the company was called Lowkey. We basically built sort of high performance video capture software for video games. So when people are playing games, you can really easily capture video clips and edit them and share them. And the whole goal of the product is just like you just get as many users as possible. We exited at like a very fortunate time. It was 2021, but just like throughout the journey, like we were at the beginning, didn't really know what we were building, and then we're just like trying a bunch of things. And you're like a new grad, you don't really have good intuition on like what idea is good or not. So you just like work really hard for 3 months, and so then you realize that what you're building basically had just like it was just obviously had no market, and so that's tough. And then about a year and a half in, I had two of my good friends from school, were my co-founders. They both got burnt out and then decided to leave. So it was just me after that, and I was just like trying to figure out what to do. I think that's way tougher than anything we're doing right now, because it's like a the way you put it, like emotional thing. It's you don't really know if there is any future or not. There's a lot of pressure because you don't want like the first thing you work on to be like a failure essentially. So I think that was much tougher from like a psychological point of view. Nowadays, I think it's tough just like a sheer amount of stuff to do. We're not getting much sleep, but again, like in the grand scheme of things, you got to be really grateful to be even be in this position, to have enough work to do, to have enough interesting problems, to have a team that you're really excited to work with every day.
How much do you think you're sleeping?
I mean, it really varies. It's just like this week in New York, it's probably like 4 to 5 hours a day. And it's not good because like I'm not someone whose brain functions that well on less than 8 hours, but it's been...
Yeah. So if you think about the difference between the first and the second company, like obviously now you have a company that's working extremely well. It's growing really, really fast. What did you do at the beginning of Decagon that was informed by your prior experience to make this one go better?
I think this is broadly true of starting companies. I think the first stage is like by far the hardest. because you're kind of just like finding direction, right? And finding direction is very difficult because like by definition, it's not something where you can just like, you have like a goal and you're just like grinding towards it and you can get there. I mean, your goal could be, finding a direction, but it's more exploratory. I think what we actually are quite good at now, and Ashwin, my co-founder, who's amazing, he also has a similar background. He started a company before that got acquired. When you start a company the first time, you often share the same experiences, which is like finding a direction is very difficult. So I think this time we were a lot more thoughtful about it. And again, it goes back to what your strengths are. I think we view our strengths as like, hey, we're very good at problem solving. We're very just like rational about things. We're just good at like execution. And so if that's the case, then I think we just try to systematize the ideation process. And it just comes down to, okay, you need to, whatever you work on, it has to be something that like people will really invest in. And how do you tell if that's the case? You can just like go really deep asking them. And I think people are usually a little bit like almost embarrassed or not comfortable going super deep in these questions. But when you talk to potential customers, they actually don't mind answering questions such as like, okay, if we built this for you, like exactly how much would you pay for it? Like, would your boss need to approve it or your boss's boss? Like who needs to approve it? How would the entire organization think about ROI? Like how would you present ROI to the leadership to, protect yourselves and also like make you look good? And I think if you really go deep there, it's almost like you're basically asking like classic like sales qualification questions, but in founder form. And because you're a founder, it's like, it just feels a lot less salesy for you to go deeper. And that process is what gives you a lot more signal. So when we first started, we, fortunately were able to get in front of a lot of large companies, mostly digital native ones. And we just asked these questions and we kept digging in. And we had a bunch of different ideas, right? At the time, we're not tied to any idea. And it's just kind of open exploration. We were looking at things ranging from like data analysis to like security to pre-sales to ops stuff. And that process was very helpful because it just shows you that there's a lot more signal to gain than just like talking to customers, which is just the general advice, or building something that customers want, or building something that people want. Like yes, that is true, but it's very hard to just like
know what they want.
That. Yeah, like they'll just tell you what they want, but then it turns out that that's like
so what was useful. What was the literal process? So would you go to a single person and ask them about multiple of your ideas at once, or would you target it more like one idea to one person?
You have to target it based on what that person owns. But if that person is very senior, you can ask him about multiple.
Yeah.
So if you talk to like a COO, for example, you can talk about a bunch of different use cases. And that gives you some signal too. And then if you're talking to more of like a VP of a certain area, you're probably focusing on one use case.
So maybe go in detail through one of these conversations so that others maybe could benefit from what you've learned. So what is the order of the questions? Like how would you structure those conversations to get the most information possible?
We get into the call and you start by kind of just doing very high level discovery, like, hey, what are the sorts of projects that are ongoing right now? How do you spend your time? What is kind of like stressful for you right now, et cetera, like that. And then you can kind of get a sense for the types of use cases. And then very quickly you can just like form hypotheses, like literally on the fly of like, okay, what would a product be that makes sense here? And so then you're kind of explaining like, okay, yeah, so what if something like an AI agent could do X, Y, Z? Like, would that be helpful? And most likely they will say yes, because I think there's this thing that happens where if someone's on a call with you, they almost feel like they owe you like something good that you can take away. So they're like, oh yeah, that'd be great. Now you've kind of solidified at least the potential product ideas, right? And they might adjust it a little bit. They'll be like, yeah, no, actually, no, like it should work like this, right? And so on. I remember we talked to a lot of ops leaders, like Matt McGinnis from Rippling is like a great friend of Decagon, and he was kind of telling us about all the different things that happen on his team because there's like so many. And similar with other ops leaders, we would talk to, and it was kind of a range of companies as well, people like Oura Ring and so on. And you get down to it and you're like, okay, great. So now we have these use cases. How much would you pay for it? And that kind of forces them to think, because most people are not thinking about that as they're talking about ideas. There's like, oh yeah, this would be cool. So as soon as you force them to think about how much you'd pay for something, it kind of is a forcing function for finding some order of magnitude, some level of scale. And so then they're like, okay, well, yeah, we have 5 people doing this full time. If the AI agent can do this well, maybe we'd be able to, get rid of one of them, assign one other one, and then, as a result, I'd pay you like, $20K a year or something like that. And then in your head, you're like, okay, cool. So now at least you have a general order of magnitude. 20K, of course, isn't amazing. But if it's like, I could quickly churn out a ton of these, like maybe that's interesting. But most of the time, that's not the case because it's like there's not that many good ideas out there, honestly. And so most of the time at the end of this exercise, you're like, okay, great. Glad I didn't pursue this further, because like that would have been a waste of time. And at the end, it's like people are paying you like $100 subscription per month. And it's like a big company, So you just do this exercise. And the nice thing about this exercise as well is that it puts the customer in the same frame of mind as you. And so then they can tell you other things. So like essentially what happened with our company is like we were talking about all these use cases and they were like, okay, great. Yeah, if you did this, we have 5 people over here. But by the way, we have a 500-person support organization and there's a lot of opportunity there. And we'd be like, okay, great. Tell us more, right? And then you kind of dig into it. As a founder, you kind of have to build your own conviction and kind of do this process yourself because at the time, essentially what everyone told us, including like, very smart older founders that we knew and so on, was that, this use case is like super obvious. There's probably just going to be incumbents that just tack it onto the product. And because it's so obvious, like there's probably a reason why like no one's super big right now, or there's going to be someone that's ahead, right? Like no one really knows. It's just like, and even for me right now, when like other founders talk to me about other spaces, it's like, yeah, like I have my own opinions, but like I don't really know the details of the space. And the only way you can really know is by talking to customers and getting that signal. And yeah, I think in hindsight, it turns out that in any sort of wave at any time, I would say like a very small number of like good ideas. And your job is to ideally find one of those at the right time. And so, yeah, by the definition, it's going to be like pretty non-obvious and pretty difficult. And so if you can do this process well, it'll give you the most signal.
Do you remember the highest number anyone said for how much they'd be willing to pay for something in one of these ideation sessions?
Yeah, so at the time, it was probably on the order of like low to mid 6 figures.
As you neared the end of that process and settled on what Decagon does, which probably is the right time to ask you to describe in detail what it is, what was like the final closing, like where did the conviction come from? Like, oh, this is clearly the thing after this discovery process.
It was clearly the thing because if you just kind of tallied up even just the amounts that people said and added them together per idea, this was probably like an order of magnitude more than anything else. And so very specifically what Decagon does, it's an AI customer service agent. So that's the simplest way to think about it. And you're building a conversational AI that can just be almost like a front end for a brand. Anytime someone wants to talk to the brand or anytime the brand wants to talk to them, you can kind of initiate these conversations. And of course, long-term, this is like not specific to customer service, but I think, again, going back to this exercise, customer service is where we felt like the most urgent need. And in hindsight, I can dissect like why we think that is, but that's basically what we felt. And what gave us conviction is that, hey, we had all these folks that were lined up they were like very willing to invest, 6 figures in a random 2-person team that they didn't even know that well, because it was actually like a very top of mind initiative for them. And everything else, it was just like a struggle to, it's like, how much you pay for that? I don't know. Like, this is like really exciting, but our budgets are tight right now. And also like, it'd be hard to measure, how well this is doing and so on. So yeah, that gave us enough conviction. And then you just kind of take it step by step from there.
Say more about the comment you made about in hindsight, it's clear why, this was the key problem.
Customer service has a bunch of nice properties that I think are very hard to reason through ahead of time, which is why I think I feel so strongly about this process of discovery. I'm like just really staying customer centric. One of the properties is that the ROI is really easy to justify internally. You have these numbers already tracked, right? It's like, hey, we have so much conversation volume. Right now, we have a simple chatbot or a simple IVR phone tree. It's, kind of resolving, so to speak, like 15 to 20% of that. If you're able to take that to 50, 60, 70, 80, like that's huge ROI, and it's very easy to quantify that. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to take the total cost. I'm going to chop off like, 60% of it, and that's what I'm saving, right? The other property, which I think is a little underrated, is that it's very easy to go live. And I think a lot of Gen AI use cases are struggling with that right now, especially at the enterprise level, because there's risk involved, right? Like people don't want to feel like something could go wrong for them when they release your product, and like, their leadership's gonna get mad at them. It's like, why'd you do this? So that is a big deal with Gen AI. I think that is one of the reasons why it's been kind of difficult for a lot of use cases to really take off, because at the end of the day, there is always going to be risk because the models are non-deterministic, and so something could always happen. But the nice thing with customer service is that you have a escalation path just naturally built into the way the product works. The agent's having the conversation. If for any reason it needs to exit, it'll just escalate to a human. And that infrastructure is already set up, right? You already have your call center, you already have your telephony stack or whatever. So you just connect to it. I think that property alone just makes things way easier, because these big enterprises that we work with, they're like, okay, great. Like, we tested it internally, and then to go live, we're just going to choose this one surface area and release it to 5% of the user base. And even for that 5%, if anything goes wrong, it just escalates. And so that gives people enough comfort to go for it. And those two things, I think, are one of the big reasons why it's probably the use case with the most traction at the enterprise. And coding is another one. Coding is a little bit different. It's a lot more bottoms up.
Can you compare it to coding? Like, it seems like these are the two areas where it's blindingly obvious that it's useful to customers and you can build great businesses around it, because just basically look at the revenue curves.
Yeah.
Yours, Sierra's, obviously like Cursor, Cognition, et cetera. Compare and contrast coding and customer service?
Yeah, they're very different. And maybe one framework to think about this is that at the end of the day, what AI agents are there for is to, essentially replace human labor. Yeah. And that's why it's exciting. That's why everyone's, so focused on it. So one thing you can do then is like, you can just map out the spectrum of like how much that human labor currently costs. So with customer service, it's generally outsourced already. It's especially for the tier 1, tier 2 type inquiries that AI is now handling. It's generally not folks that are super highly paid. And then on the other end, it's engineers, which are the most highly paid people. Yeah. And so I actually think like maybe the one way to think about it is that like AI use case will start eating the spectrum from both ends. And the reason why is that because engineers are the highest paid, like they have the sophistication to like really leverage it well. And like AI just gives them so much leverage. And I mean, there's other factors as well. Like, it just happens that coding is like tokenizable, and like it's really like the models are really good at it. So that's one way to think about it. And so I don't know any company that's like, hey, I would like to just let go of a bunch of my engineers because now I have coding agents. It's just like there's infinite engineering work to do, so you're just augmenting them. On the other end, it is more of like the replacement sense. And so you have a large BPO, and that's costing you a ton of money, and it's also like a really high operational thing to maintain, because you have to hire people all the time. There's a ton of churn. You need to train them. You need to QA them. You need to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So AI is really valuable there as well, because you're able to because the work is easier for the AI to do. It can fully replace. I think it's a little bit overblown of like, AI is replacing jobs and so on. I think most of even the BPOs we talk to, they're not really that concerned, because what typically happens anyways is that there's already very high turnover in these BPOs, because like people are just hopping around and doing all sorts of different things. And so what most enterprises will do is like, it's not like, hey, I'm gonna massively, it's like you're gonna just like kind of just naturally let it decrease. And then they just go on to do sort of the next level of task that the AI can't do yet, right? And so maybe that's like data labeling or something. So that's generally what we're seeing from the BPOs. But yeah, anyways, I think this spectrum is like pretty real. And so then the question is like, what is the next thing that happens?
So it's a really interesting conclusion, which is try to augment the very highest talent or replace, the most replaceable end of the spectrum. That's like a really interesting conclusion. I want to talk about how, kind of what you've begun to learn about how to do that second thing well. So if others out there wanted to start a company or invest in a company that was doing sort of that end of the spectrum, eating its way in, as you described, what have you learned are the key things to like the setup process with a given company to increase the likelihood that you can replace a lot of the, the low-hanging fruit for types of customer service calls or types of what used to be human-to-human interaction and can now be handled by AI on one end of the spectrum?
I would say the biggest learning we had is that oftentimes the long pole in the tent, and again, if you can solve this well, it just makes things go a lot easier, is sort of aligning on what does good look like. You would think that in our space, it's pretty easy because it's like, okay, maybe you just have a bunch of questions and answers, and that's what good looks like. But unfortunately, it's a lot more nuanced than that. Like, what good looks like could be in the tone of, in the sense of like tone and brand guidelines, or how conversational you are. And even for the actual answers, like we work with a lot of enterprises where obviously their scope is broad. And so one of the things you need to set up beforehand is, what's good look like. So like we have in our product essentially like a testing or simulation suite of like, hey, we're going to build out 10,000 tests, and each one is going to be constantly running like 5 times, and then you can get a sense of how well things are performing. And that's actually pretty difficult, and I do think that is broadly true for anyone that's trying to build in this style of company. If you're going to be replacing human labor, you need to know what good human labor is. What we found is like, okay, well, can someone just tell us like what are the answers to all these questions? And most people don't actually know. Like no one in their head is like, because these are large, complex organizations, right? No one is like the person where like, hey, I know how to answer all these questions. And so you have to design a process where it's very easy to extract these answers from all the people that do know. So maybe it's all the CX leaders and people lead different areas of the product, and so you have to get them all together and get them to align on like, okay, here's what the eval is essentially. And if you can do that well, then it makes everything a lot easier, because now you're just building. You have this like quantifiable score that's like, hey, here's how well the AI is performing. And then once you're done building and the score is high, then you can go live.
Is the right way to think about this that you just created like a captive reinforcement learning process within an organization? Is that like the simplified version?
Yeah. That's an interesting way to think about it. And it doesn't have the reinforcement learning in the pure sense of training a model. It's
right.
like it can just be reinforcement learning and making the agent improve. And that could be compiling more evals. That could be compiling just like more guardrails, guidelines around what it can and can't do.
How fast does the spread happen? If I'm a customer and I've got the 500-person customer service call center or whatever, and I'm actually curious. I don't know what the volumes are. Like how much call volume or interaction volume a center like that handles for a given company. But if I give you 5% of my workload and I'm satisfied with AI's performance, like it performs well, and there's not lots of problems, how fast are people willing to go from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20%?
Very fast. Yeah, I would say even for large enterprises, like within weeks, because everyone wants to just go live to everything, right? But the reason why you stage it out is so you can make sure nothing's going wrong. Yeah. And you can tell if something's going wrong like almost immediately because you have these metrics, right? So if even within a week, you have a 500-person org, I would probably estimate like mid to high 6 figures of conversations a year, maybe slightly higher. And what you're doing there is like you're kind of making sure that things are going well. So within a week you can see like, okay, what is the resolution rate? Is that what we expect? Okay, great. What is the customer satisfaction? People have those scores as well, and then they'll probably have some sort of accuracy metric based on like human review. If those all check out, there's really no reason why you shouldn't roll it out. And again, the business case is so obvious there, right? It's like, hey, we're both generating a ton of operational efficiency, and our customers are happier. So yeah, let's just send it out to everything.
What goes most wrong? Like when something bad happens, and I'm sure this is happening less and less as the product's gotten better, but even in the early days, like what sort of thing would go wrong in one of the customer to AI interactions?
Yeah, so it ranges all sorts of different things. And it's kind of funny sometimes it's obviously like both sides, like us and the customer, we take everything very seriously. But there's just a lot of things you wouldn't expect, right? In the early days, we have a customer that is essentially like a large ticketing platform. Someone came in, they couldn't find their ticket. The AI looked into their account. It's like, hey, there's no tickets here. And then they were just like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show up to the event and I'm going to find 8 homeless people from the city and bring them with me. And the agent was like, oh my God, that's so awesome that you're thinking about doing something nice for the community. And it's just like things like that where it's like, okay, I would not expect that to happen. So those are just like tuning you have to do over time.
Yeah.
And generally it's in the spirit of that where you're trying to find the right level of guardrail and flexibility, right? I think that's the name of the game with our space at least. And that's sort of the way we've designed our product and why probably the number one reason we've been successful so far is that what Gen AI really unlocks is just this like super flexible, super personalized. Like one way you can think about it is like in the old days to map out a conversation, you just build like a gigantic tree, right, of decisions. And that's very hard because no one likes that experience. And like you ask something that's not quite one of the branches and it just forces you down that branch and there's no way to go back. And what a LLM does is kind of it abstracts a lot of that tree into the neurons of a language model. And so that's really powerful. So you kind of on one end of the spectrum, you're just looking for flexibility and just like power and just like being able to sound really human-like. But with the enterprise, there are a lot of things we don't necessarily want that as much. And you want just like full like rigor, right? If it's a regulated use case, like you cannot afford for it to ever deviate. And so you want like these 3 steps always have to be followed in this order, and you can't go to step 3 until something has happened already. And so you need to design a system that can be anywhere along that spectrum. And back to your question of like what could go wrong. Well, yeah, the worst thing to happen would be it just says something that's not supposed to say. And so you need to design an AI that's really robust to that, and you can choose like, okay, for this use case, we really need it to be over here. That's a lot more robust. But for other use cases where if you're just asking basic questions on their account, we don't want it to be like that. We want it to be super freeform, and that's how we get the customer satisfaction up.
I think most people are still focused on things that could go wrong because it's non-deterministic. What about the total other end of the spectrum? Like, what have been the things that have gone way more right than you expected? Like, where has the potential of agents like outperformed your expectation in terms of what they can handle or what they can do?
Yeah, it's really just elevating the experience, right? So one sort of metric, which is usually a secondary metric that folks kind of think about later, but is quite important to us, is just how often do people come in and just say like, agent, like give me to a representative, like I want to talk to you. And I've done that. You probably have as well, where you're just like calling into some sort of customer service and you're just like pressing 0 the whole time. And that's because people are used to bad experiences. So they've already lost the trust of these systems. And I think what surprised us was that if you just make it really clear off the bat that this is a different experience, people are willing to give it a chance, and then the outcomes are just way different, right? So we have one of our customers, Aura Ring, like the wearable ring. We did a case study with them where before having any sort of Gen AI system, like 1 in 3 customer that came in would just not bother saying anything and just keep jamming agent until they got to one. Now it's 1 in 20. It's because we just like spent a lot of time making the beginning of the process just feel very different, and folks are willing to give it a chance. And so I think that's been exciting.
Where do you think that can go? Like how good can the experience get in ways that it's not yet that good with subsequent evolution of your product, but also of the underlying capabilities of the model?
The biggest frontier right now is voice models. And so I know there's a lot of interesting startups as well working on voice. It's exciting because it's still, I would say, definitely not solved. There's a lot to be done there, and the bar is very high, right? So if you just think about like how humans communicate, right, for literally the entirety of humanity, right, like I don't know, 150,000 years or something, the UI for every human is language, and it's just like spoken language. So you listen, you speak, and that's how our brains have evolved. That's like the most natural way for us to communicate. Only in the last 60 years of that entire time did we have keyboards and like phones, and you're kind of just communicating through typing. And so I would say fundamentally, in any sort of agent that communicates with humans, like voice has to be a critical factor, because that's just how we communicate. Because our brains are so sort of, evolved for this, it's very easy to tell when something feels not quite right. And so the bar is very high. That sort of uncanny valley is quite large. And that's why there's a lot of effort going into making the voice experiences good. Even ChatGPT, I would say ChatGPT voice, for example, or the Sesame, or like these voice-to-voice models, they're starting to feel very impressive. But if you talk to it long enough, you can definitely tell it's not a human. So there's that element of it. But then even for enterprise use cases like us, like there's still a ton of hurdles to cross, because those models, even though they're good, the hallucination rate's really high. So you can't really use them necessarily as is in kind of the current systems. And so a lot of people, what they do now is they go from voice into text and then back to voice, and then you can run a lot more checks there to make sure that things are accurate. A lot of cool ideas there to explore on how do you make it both human-like but accurate, and how do you tie everything together. So that's where most of the work is going to these days.
At the risk of getting too technical, why is voice to voice interesting and worth pursuing versus just always going back to text and being able to manage it that way?
Yeah, so the fundamental difference is, if you're just going to text, then no matter what, the final audio is just a narration of the text. voice to voice is powerful because it takes into the entire audio of what you said. So it knows, your cadence and, how upset you are and just like the tone and everything. The latency is a lot less as well because you're going straight from again, voice to voice. And latency matters so much when we're talking, right? Like when we're talking right now, our brains are constantly going on like, okay, when's he done talking? When should I start talking? If someone interrupts someone else, it's like in a polite way. It's just people adjust very naturally. That is the biggest proponent of voice to voice. And ultimately, the prevailing view is that for whatever the final experience is, if you really want to make it indistinguishable from a human, you have to do voice to voice, or you have to at least take into account the voice. The issue with voice to voice, though, is that also fundamentally, because voice has a lot more dimensions to it, like the amount of tokens you generate like per sentence is just a lot higher than when you generate text. And the more tokens you have, the higher, like the easier it is for something to go wrong. And so the hallucination rate has so far just been a lot higher.
How much higher? Like give us a sense of how far we are from these being really good.
I think probably like 8x higher or something like that.
Wow.
So it is quite a bit higher. Yeah, I mean, of course, you want to kind of leverage that technology. So now maybe there's creative ways to make a hybrid of the two, right? Maybe you can have a text model generate the content, but you take into account the audio from before as well, and that makes something very realistic. But at the same time, latency is still the hard problem because at the enterprise, what's happening is you are doing a lot before you can start responding, right? You have to figure out like what are they asking about, like what materials do I need to collect? Do I need to hit any APIs and get that data back? And so you have to do it in a way that feels very natural. And sometimes if you think about how a human does it, you might have to say something like, give me a sec to look that up because it actually genuinely takes like 10 seconds for the API to come back. So these are all kind of interesting problems to think through.
So give us a sense today in a given, if you add up all the interactions, some idea of how long they are, what type they are, voice versus text versus some other modality. Like what is just the entire corpus of interactions between a Decagon agent and a customer look like today?
Pretty balanced at this point between chat and voice. There's on a raw customer basis, there's more people in chat, at least for us. But if you just think about the large enterprises like the Fortune 100, they've just been around for so long and everyone just calls them. So voice is just like disproportionately higher there. Like a lot of them are 95% voice and 5% chat. In terms of the types of conversations, it's generally ones that are fairly, you start with the sort of easier ones, of course. And so these are things where you can they're kind of question answer based, right? So that's the tier one is like, hey, you can answer their question based on what you statically know. So that could be, I've questions about how your loyalty system works, or I have questions about, if I do, if I bought something, like would I still be able to refund it, like things like that. Then the next level is still question and answer based, but you're leveraging a lot of real time data. So that could be, I got 2x points on this transaction, but I should have gotten 5. Like, why is that? And then it would actually go and look into your account and reason through things like, okay, I see the accounts listed at this type. Let me go find all the documentation on this type. And like, okay, actually it's because you booked through a travel agency. If you have booked directly with the airline, you would have gotten 5x, but this thing doesn't apply to a travel agency or whatever, right? And then the sort of third tier is you're actually taking action. So, I lost my credit card. I need a new one. And it's actually walking through a pretty large flow. And that's where AI agents have been really excellent because you actually wouldn't expect it to be able to do that. And so it's able to go in. It can be a pretty complicated system where it's like, okay, well, first I need to figure out what your address is and confirm if the address is correct. And then I need to look and see, hey, do you want me to lock the old card? Like, okay, great, I'll do that. I might need to check for fraud to make sure this person is not just constantly asking for new cards. And it's just like all these things stitched together. That's really what makes it agentic. And that's why there's been such a step function improvement with LLMs.
In the spirit of that question of like what could go right for the company based on the data they're gathering from these interactions that they probably have been doing nothing with historically? Like what new things can they do for their customer because of, on a one-to-one basis, like they're just learning more about a person, and on the aggregate basis, they like understand the behavior patterns of their customer base or something?
Oh yeah, that is a huge topic. I think that's a huge part of our product. Like we have a viewpoint that this data, of course, is super valuable because it's literally what your customers are saying, but it's very underutilized because historically there's it's a very unstructured data. So what people typically would do is like, okay, well, every month we have 1 million conversations. We'll have a full-time team of 20 people, and they're just like sampling these conversations and trying to like check on a rubric and try to compile topics and things like that, right? And that will only get you so far. But now what you can do is you can literally have a language model that reads every conversation and extracts whatever info you want from it. And so that allows you to do things like, okay, well, over time, there are these topics that people probably didn't even know about because these organizations are big, right? So the people in leadership positions, they can only have such granular insight into what's happening. But it'll literally just flag like, hey, there's this 2% of conversations where things are not really going that well. And it's because we don't have context on this topic. And so let's flag that. Let's draft a suggestion for what could go better here based on what how the human agents are handling it or based on the other procedures that we have. And here's a suggestion for how we should adjust the agent. And that allows the agent to improve automatically over time. And that's really critical. So when you think about like moats in the agentic world, a lot of it is around, well, if you've kind of been working with a client for a year, has your agent just continuously gotten better by learning from the data? And that's a different concept than just like training on the data, but has it continuously gotten better to the point where it's just very difficult for another agent to come in and perform at the same level?
There's this funny situation today where I think especially CEOs really want AI in their businesses. They want it now, but they don't know what they want. Like they don't have a good framework for thinking about, okay, I understand my business. I don't know where to go. Like it seems like I would be missing a major boat if I don't deploy this in my business, but I don't know what to do. Like I don't know where to go first. I don't know who to call. Have you developed any framework for those company leaders that like desperately want to use this technology in their business, but they simply don't know? Of course, apart from automating, customer service or something, not like, I don't mean specific use cases. I mean like a framework for thinking about what kinds of problems might be addressable by agents or by LLMs.
I mean, one framework is similar to the sort of framework we talked about before of two ends of the spectrum. And I would say most leaders we talk to are focused on the more bottoms up end of the spectrum, which is like, where are the areas that we should just not have humans doing because it's so mundane and repeatable and there's tons of cost efficiencies there. So I would say that's where folks are typically thinking of. So when we talk to leaders, I think there's a couple observations. One, pretty much all AI initiatives are very top down at this point because it is such a board level mandate. So that the C-suite is very, very invested in like, okay, where do we deploy AI? That almost means that if you want to get something going at a larger organization, you have to have buy-in from the top level because it's going to get up there anyways, and they have to make the decision at the end of the day. So that's one. Two, the way they think about like the use cases, to your point, is back to ROI, right? It's like, where can we either save a bunch of money or make a lot of new revenue? And if you cannot, like in basically half a sentence, explain that, then it's just not going to work right now because they are under a lot of pressure, right? They need to show like quick wins, and if this is not going to be a quick win, and they can point to like I saved $10 million, then yes, this is not going to be something that's prioritized.
Do you think coding answers that well? Like, you think the ROI is clear in coding?
Yeah, it is. And I know the coding agents quite well, and the way they do it generally is one, it's very easy to test. So it's like, let's just deploy out to the engineers, and then you just kind of like do a poll on the engineers of like, hey, how much more productive do you think you are? And engineers are often the most valuable resource in these organizations. And so they're like, those answers are treated very, with high, I guess, like importance.
Yeah.
And if an engineer tells you that they're like 50% more productive, it's like, okay, great.
Are you confident that that's true, that they can self-report and be accurate? There was that Meteor study or whatever that came out that actually like, I don't know if the study's good or not, but that actually productivity was like down or flat or something like this. So like the self-reported productivity was at odds with like actual measured productivity or something like this.
Oh yeah, I mean, I actually don't have an opinion. I don't know nearly enough about that, but I'm just saying that doesn't really matter, right? Like if their entire engineering team is like, hey, we love this is making us 50% more productive.
Yeah,
it's like
and they're
super
the ones
easy
building your thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And then if you think about it from the CEO and if they're like reporting this to the board or something, it's like, hey, like my entire engineering org said that they're 50% more productive. This is like a worthy investment because these people are all paid this much, and like now we can accelerate the product, we can accelerate everything.
Do you think that the future is that every I want to talk about brands and how how a given company might want its agent to feel and sound. That like an agent might be a way to express brand, culture, style, tone, whatever. I want to talk about that. But do you think the end state here is that each company sort of has like almost like a named personified representative that you just come to expect to interact with, and it's not just customer service issues, but it's sales issues. You know, you ask it for advice on what shoe to buy or whatever it might be, and that's all integrated, or that you'll have different agents for different parts of the company. Like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is what the future of a company's agent or agents looks like in the natural end state, 5 years from now or something.
Yeah, I would say that in the natural end state, it is more unified for the exact reason you listed, which is people want a unified brand out there. And the brand is very important to them. And for some businesses, it's more important than others. But eventually, this becomes the front end for the business, right? And so that means it's both how you gain new customers, but also how you support the existing ones and make them retain more and so on. It's almost like, in the limit, right? Like if you're working with a bank or airline or telecom company or whatever, the agent could be the only thing that most users interact with. They don't even have to touch your mobile app. They don't even have to, go on your website ever. They just have this agent where they're authenticated. It knows everything about them. It has all the context of your previous conversations. It has memory, and it can just solve your issue. It can take actions for you. You need to book a flight. You need to upgrade a seat. You have questions about this or that. I think that's the exciting vision that we're building towards. And in some ways, we often call this like a concierge, where it's like it's just a digital concierge that can do everything for you. But you also have to be pragmatic on both sides. Like you have to start with a clear use case. But I think that is where folks are building towards. And so in the near term, I do think that different teams, because the reality is that at these large companies, different teams have different budgets and they make different decisions. And so they might have different agents. But long term, you either need to have a unified system that ties them together, like a unified framework, or they could just be literally the same agent.
Is the right analogy here like a company's website? Like they'll think about their agent like they think about their website. Like a lot of work will go into it. It'll look and feel a certain way. Like it'll be kind of a unified interface with the world. Like is that a clean analogy?
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. It's just like a front end, right? It's like a UI.
Yeah.
But instead of visual UI, it's a conversational UI.
How do you feel brands pulling, personality requests in their agent out of you? Like, do they care about, what do they care about? Like they want it to be nice. They want it to be, concise. Do they want it to be funny? Do they how has that dimension evolved since you started?
People almost always already have brand guidelines because they need to show brand guidelines to their human agents, right? To train them. And so the nice part is that they already have all this training process for the humans, and you should ideally be able to apply it in the same ways to the AI. And so they'll have like, hey, you need to do this. You need to always be confident. Sometimes folks don't want the agent to apologize. Sometimes people really want to be apologetic. So it's just people have just different preferences, and that needs to be taught to the AI in an efficient way. But that's also kind of a lower throughput way of communicating. The other way that you can show the agent is just give it a lot of examples. So here's examples of what great look like from our top agents, and just learn from that.
What is the very biggest, like you're almost afraid to admit it because it feels so big, version of what Decagon could be? Yeah,
at the end of the day, what we are building towards is kind of this concept of, it becomes like a new UI for the product, right? Just think about how much these large companies invest in their mobile app or their website. And this is just literally how everyone communicates with them. So this could be a way where eventually the way any user interacts with any brand is through an AI agent, and it's for all sorts of different use cases, right? And it benefits the AI, it benefits our customers for the AI to have all this context because it can seamlessly flow between things. It's like a lot of them want to do sales type use cases, at the end of a support flow or vice versa, and that's exciting. What internal context or things do the best customers have that make this better? So you mentioned brand guidelines, like maybe there's a write-up on what the brand guidelines are or whatever. What are like the internal assets that companies have or don't have that if they have them, it's made the Decagon experience like way, way better? The number one thing is just APIs for the AI to use, right? So APIs to take action, APIs to look up data, APIs to reformat things. That is often like, hey, if you have those, you already know that within the first month, it's already going to be a great experience. If you don't yet, then we should try to build towards that as soon as possible so that the AI can actually achieve that elevated experience. So that's the main thing. Most people already have documentation. It might not be up to date, but we can help with that. Most people already have sort of like SOPs, I guess, and then we are able to use that and kind of generate our format. We call them AOPs, agent operating procedures. They're just SOPs but for AI. And then brand guidelines, like I said, people usually have those as well. So you just ingest them.
We were talking last time about, in any business, but certainly in yours, the three key stakeholders being your team, talent that you have to recruit. And I want to talk about that in detail. Capital, investors, and customers. Maybe suppliers too is a fourth category, but especially interested in the first three. And last time we were together, I asked you which one do you have trouble with? And we laughed because you said, well, definitely not investors. Talk a little bit about the demand from investors to invest in companies like yours and how that feels. Like, what are they doing to try to give you more money, get on the cap table? How competitive does it feel? What does that feel like right now? Because it does seem like there's a handful of companies like yours that are in one of these white hot areas that have key traction, that have great teams, and basically every investor wants to be involved in those companies. What does that feel like?
Yeah, it definitely feels like there's maybe a little bit too much excitement right now on the AI side. It's just like it just seems way too easy to raise money. So many companies out there, and I mean, for us, we've been very fortunate, right? We don't take it for granted. I mean, I think in my first company, we were also fortunate it was easy to raise, but it was for different reasons, like 2021. Nowadays, it's just, I think there aren't that many AI companies that have like real traction on the revenue side, especially in the enterprise. And so I think that's attractive to investors because they want to deploy their capital into AI, and that's like the biggest trend. So I think we've had a great relationship with all our investors. I think we just really selected for folks that we get along with at a personal level, and we feel like will be very helpful for our go-to-market normally. And that's kind of been an interesting process. So yeah, pretty much after every single time we've raised a round, we just like almost immediately gotten preempted, and that alone can't be right. It's like if you're thinking of first principles to make an investment, like the previous valuation should not be like a super big factor in that. It should be like how well is the business doing, how like what do I believe the potential is. So it feels like there's a little bit of mania, but we're definitely, I would say, more indexed on the other two things like talent and customers.
What's the craziest thing that an investor has done to try to invest in the business?
The main thing that we do, and I would actually encourage more founders to do this, is that during the stage where people want to invest, but they haven't yet, that's when they're most willing to be helpful. And so it's actually like a great way for you to use that to proxy how helpful they'll be afterwards. Because if they're not that helpful in that stage where they really want to invest and they're willing to do anything, they're for sure not going to be helpful afterwards, right? They'll still be friendly and like hopefully they'll not be detrimental, but that's like your opportunity to really test folks and see like how helpful someone will be. And we obviously know a lot of investors very well. And I think no one has issue with that, like they know that they're going back to, competition. They're also in a competitive sport, and they know that they need to earn basically the ability to invest in the best companies. And so I think from their perspective, they're happy to work for it. So if you just give them an opportunity to, they will. I'm
going to ask about this from both founder and investor perspective. What advice would you give investors during that window? Like when there's a fundraising that's happening, there's sort of an open process or a window or whatever. What have you seen the best of them do well? Not just in like, I'm sure helping you, here's 10 customers you can talk to. I'm sure that's great. But also on the underwriting side, like them making sure they understand your business extremely well in usually what I'm expecting is a short period of time. What have the very best done in that window?
So number one, I think the best investors they kind of like get this dynamic, right? Like we've definitely talked to a lot of high profile investors where they're just like not willing to help much until they're invested. And it's like totally they're right? It's like, hey, we have a lot of our current investments. We don't want to like use our social capital or whatever to help with like a new investor or a new investment. But I think from the founder's perspective, like, okay, if that's the case, then it's hard to tell if you'll actually be useful or not, right? It's like there's no difference between you saying that and then someone who can't really help and is just saying that. So I think the best ones just are able to give a lot of signal to the founder that like, hey, I'm really willing to help. I have the ability to help, and let's say it doesn't have to be that long a period of time, like a couple months before the round actually happens, right? So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that I think if you just think about anyone you bring into the org, this could be employees or investors or advisors or anything. What we really index a lot on is just cognitive ability, just like raw intellectual throughput. And you can almost like feel that out in an investor in the same way you would feel it out in an employee, just by spending time with them and just like actually seeing if they're thinking about things from first principles of your company. Like for example, right, like a lot of AI companies are growing much faster than traditional SaaS companies right now. And so because that's the case, like a lot of things are different. And you generally don't want investors that are just like, hey, I've seen this so many reps, like you got to do things like XYZ way. Like you want people that are just intellectually curious and will think about things along with you and can help problem solve.
What about on just like the pure underwriting side? So an investor comes in, they're really smart, let's take that for granted, and they just want to understand your business, like the good, the bad, the ugly as fast as possible. What have you seen the best do in that side of the investment process, including things like how fast they move or how deliberate they move or anything like that?
The best ones, I would say, they get a very deep understanding of our customers. And so it's actually funny. Our customers have made probably so much money on expert calls because so many investors are hitting them up. And I think the best ones before they even talk to you, they've probably already done like quite a bit of research and have like pretty full view on your customers. Unfortunately, I think what we've seen is that there is a lot of noise there because like a lot of people just lie on customer calls. And like we have people who had said that they've used us and we like literally never heard of them. But generally, if you do enough research and you're good at it, then you can kind of underwrite the business that way because that gives you the most signal. And the other one is people that index on culture, because I think culture is quite important and a lot of good investors know how important that is. And so if they feel like you are becoming a place where good talent is congregating, then folks will index on that more.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about recruiting and culture, starting with culture. How would you describe it? We talked about the quote on your wall is the first question. So that's part of it, of course, like extremely competitive, extreme bias to action, get things done. What are the other key components of your culture? Like when you're sitting with a new recruit, what do you tell them about what kind of place it is?
There's definitely a level of intensity that's important. And you definitely want to tell people that up front because you want them to self-select into this culture. So everyone that has joined Decagon, I would say, they want to work hard. They want to be around other people that are really smart and are like them. And they're motivated by, they view this as kind of like, maybe the prime of their career where, hey, I'm going to work hard, but we know that because of that, I'm going to build sort of lifelong relationships with like other amazing people. I'm going to, have good financial outcomes. I'm going to be able to leapfrog steps in my career because the growth is just happening so quickly. So it's kind of, you're attracting people like that. Yeah, I think that alone creates like a pretty strong foundation for the culture because you have people that are there to, work. We have a lot of people that live right next to the office. And part of that is because like we've, just selected for people that like being in the office with other people, right? We're in the office a lot. Those are the foundations. And then I think what you have to be careful on top of that is like, okay, well, you still need we really want our office to be a place where people enjoy coming to work every day. Because we spend a lot of time in there, it's like you want people to be, happy to be there. They feel like everyone there is supporting them. Even between the organizations, you want people to feel like they're pretty aligned and, folks are kind of working towards the same goal. And that's an ongoing problem. Like I don't think like we've solved culture, but it's something we just put a lot of thought into, and we want to make sure that people feel like they will be very fulfilled by staying here for a long time.
One of the most interesting subplots of this entire business evolution in and around AI is talent wars. Obviously, it's happening in the most extreme cases at the model layer. Between Meta and Anthropic and OpenAI, and there's great riveting stories to hear about the lengths people will go to secure a great, and the amount they'll pay to secure a great engineer or someone really key to the business. Can you give us your perspective on these talent wars, what it's like to be in them? Obviously, I'm sure you are too, fighting for the best talent versus lots of other great companies that are being formed. Tell us from the inside what this environment feels like.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like talent is a big team effort. Like you for anyone you want to hire, you need the whole team to swarm around them for, to win highly sought after talent. And you have to go and do all the things, right? There are some parallels to sales, of course. Like you're trying to like convince people that, hey, this is the place they want to be. So that involves, oftentimes getting to know their families, getting to know their partners, really figuring out like what they want out of their own careers, and making sure that you can design a role for them that is like that. Unfortunately, in the application layer, it is not as crazy as the Metas and the OpenAIs, who are just like there's only so many top level researchers, and we have some very strong researchers on our team, but it's a lot more of like a applied for us. It's the same thing that happens, right? Like we're going after a lot of people on our team from like Harvard and MIT and Stanford. There's only so many of these folks that are in the market at any time who are like in SF or going to the office, and so it is a competitive place to be. I think we're kind of fortunate, and now our talent brand has gotten a lot larger than when we were first starting, and so it definitely has gotten easier to hire. But at the same time, the amount of people we need to hire has also gone up. And so it's just constantly just like finding ideas of how to get new people. I mean, we just opened up our New York office, as you know, and that's part of the reason for that is that, hey, there's another talent pool over here. We should leverage that.
One of the questions that I think so many people are interested in for companies like yours is the use of whatever core underlying LLM versus the development of your own models on top of or replacing those underlying LLMs. You are gathering all this incredible data that's just yours. You don't have to share with anybody else. These models, thrive on good underlying data. How do you think about that aspect of all of this, where 5 years from now it's going to be either your own model or your own model plus something else, or just your own data and context on top of the best model? How do you think that will evolve? I'm both curious about this in terms of how it impacts the product, but also how it impacts your business moat, your power in your business, where you rely or don't rely on, GPT, whatever.
When we first started, this was like about 2 years ago, people were still figuring out applications. Almost no one was doing fine tuning. In fact, anyone that was doing fine tuning, there was a lot of like writing at that time was like fine tuning, quote unquote, doesn't work because it doesn't really get you that many gains. And another big reason to not do fine tuning at that time is that the models are changing so fast, and like you're still kind of figuring out your use case. So like, why invest so much time into fine tuning? It's not reversible. You're gonna have to throw it out next time there's a new model release. I think now the open source models, for example, have gotten to the point where they're definitely not smart enough to do everything, but there's a lot of specific use cases where you just don't need that much intelligence. Example would be, like even the agent, let's say the first thing the agent does is it just needs to think about like, okay, based on what the user said and everything before, like what path do I go down, right? Or what data do I need? You can make that a fine-tuned model. That model doesn't have to be good at like math or coding or anything. It's just like you just need a smaller model that's just fine-tuned on that. And nowadays we're seeing much more of that because a lot of the applications have gotten more mature. So you know how your agent is structured, you know the places where you need models to run, and you can take smaller fine-tuned models, and that improves the entire system, both in terms of performance, but also latency and so on. So I think over time, there's going to be more and more of that. I do think there's still always going to be sort of like a huge usage of the OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world, because if you just need intelligence, like you need the best models. So I think there's going to be a balance, but at least in the short term, there's going to be more and more of the fine-tuning small models that happen.
What is your perception of the very biggest companies? Like the entire market has been focused on, rightly so, the 7, 8, 9, 10 biggest technology companies. Which of them feel most important to you? And I don't mean OpenAI and Anthropic. I mean like Microsoft and Amazon and Apple and these sorts of companies. What is your relation and thinking about them today? They've been the driver of equity markets by a huge margin. They're important companies. How do you relate to them?
Work-wise, it's not super relevant, but of course we have our own opinions. I'm very bullish on Google, actually.
Why?
I just think that with AI use cases, having individual like consumers is like so important, because that's where all the data comes from anyways. And Google is like much stronger there. You could say that Meta, Facebook also has that element, and so maybe their new superintelligence lab will be able to make it work. But something like Anthropic, for example, where they haven't done as well on the consumer side, compared to like a ChatGPT. I think long term you do need that consumer buy-in because that's where all the new data is going to come from. So yeah, Google, and I mean Google just has an amazing team, and they've had a couple of like rocky starts, but hopefully they'll make it work out. I mean, of course, all the large, like all the Mag 7 basically are obviously super strong. So we don't really have strong views on them.
If I let you build a portfolio tomorrow where you got 5 slots, 20% each in 5 private companies, building in and around AI, what portfolio would you build? Decagon excluded?
Yeah, Decagon excluded. Let's see. I just kind of gravitate towards where most of the talent is forming. I mean, I mentioned I'm close with the cognition guys, so cognition would be in there for sure. Cursor also. I'm actually kind of interested in like where those might run into each other in the future. For me, definitely would want to take a bet on the sort of the hardware layer, even though it's like a much higher variance. So I mean, last time we were talking about etched, like companies like that. I think you probably put one of those in there. Still on the earlier side, but yeah, obviously very high potential. Yeah, another friend of mine is building a company called Pika, like building video models. So I just think very highly of that team as well. So you probably put them in there. Probably would want some sort of bet on the just like underlying model side, even though, I mean, all the large language models are out there. But another friend of mine I think very highly of, they're building models, but not like the types of language models, but still foundation models for like healthcare, for example. So a friend of mine, Josh, is building Chai, and they're building a foundational model. So stuff like that, I think is quite interesting. Or even I would put Lockheed's company, Physical Intelligence.
Yeah.
Like those, I think those are very exciting. It's just, I mean, it obviously is early to see how those will turn out, but if I'm building a portfolio, definitely want one of those in there.
What do you think are, I'm interested in both ends of the spectrum, the people that aren't in your position, who are both technical and commercially at the center of this wave, what do they overestimate and underestimate about the capabilities of AI today? Where is it further along than the world thinks? Where is it further behind?
It's a little bit more behind in being able to unlock a lot of the enterprise use cases, I would say, because of the non-determinism. So there's like 2 things that need to happen. One, you need to reframe the way that people think about agents, because like there's a Waymo effect that often happens where it'll be objectively just way better than human drivers, and human drivers make a lot of mistakes. But because we're investing in new technology, the bar is a lot higher, so it has to be near perfect. So there's that dynamic that kind of needs to adjust in some folks' mind, where instead of evaluating AI in a way where you're just trying to find mistakes, you're evaluating holistically, looking at the sort of success rate. And then if you can kind of frame it that way, well, the success rate is going to be way higher than humans because, again, humans are not perfect, right? So I think that needs to happen, and I don't think that's fully happened yet in the enterprise. So that trend needs to happen. And then on the AI and on the sort of use case side, yeah, I think the models still need to get better in a lot of areas, right? We were just talking about voice-to-voice earlier. Hallucinations are too high there. And so as those models get better, I think more enterprise use cases will be unlocked. But I do think the general public will just see a really cool demo and be like, okay, oh wow, like voice is solved now. And as a result, like, the enterprises should be adopting it left and right. And C-suites will see that too. But then when they actually get into it, it's just it's harder to go live, right? So that's, I would say, the piece where it's not quite, fully there yet. And so it's a little bit slower than people think. On the flip side of that, where it's like a little hard, it's like underestimated, is just things are growing exponentially, improving exponentially. And no one is good at kind of conceptualizing what exponential means in things like this. And so that could be from like a performance, like cost perspective, right? Like right now, I would argue that if you're building an application, your margin shouldn't really matter that much. Like people will often sort of critique the coding agents like they're hemorrhaging money. Yeah, but again, things are improving exponentially, and like the cost will go down exponentially as well. So your margin doesn't really matter. Like what really matters is you need to get market share, and you need to kind of get mind share of users. So it's like perfectly fine not to have good margins right now, and it's just, I think the models just like everything just improves way faster than people think. It's slightly different at the enterprise. I mean, the same principle applies, but you generally don't want to be hemorrhaging cash with like an enterprise sort of deal, because like those are just much longer term. And even though the costs will go down, their expectations might also change and so on. So you generally want to be fairly healthy there. But that I think that's what's underestimated right now.
How do you know that costs will get way lower? Like I'm very curious about this margin question, because if you knew for sure, then the argument would be actually you want to run super negative gross margins. Like if you knew that it was going to get, 98% cheaper or something like this on cost of goods to serve a coding agent or something like that, whatever. I think the argument would be get the install base, just like have the best product and get the users and build the affinity with that user base, and don't care at all. But that hinges a lot on the confidence that you have that those costs will fall. So how do you know? Like how do you think about that equation of like win install base versus like demonstrate good unit economics now?
Well, I just think it's quite unlikely that where we're currently at is like the best that things will be, right? Like there's just so much effort getting put into it, and like one of the main metrics is efficiency. The other piece is that even if things don't get better, there's a lot of like ways you can re-architect your system so that it is more cost efficient. It's just that it's not worth putting time into that right now, where you can put that same amount of time into getting new customers, because you know that like things will change in the future. So I think that's just one thing where people are like, oh, like it's kind of like a scheme where you take VC dollars and then like the VC dollars go to the chips, and like these companies are losing money. Like if they wanted to, probably they could just like spend a month or even less and just like massively improve their margins. But no, it's just not worth doing that work right now, because what you're really optimizing for right now is just quality and growth. So if you can do that, then the optimization can always come later on.
How do you think about your margins? Like just putting it on Decagon, like do you care at all? Do you set them? Do you like what's your guardrails or parameters for what's acceptable or what you're targeting?
The only thing that we have a principle for is not to have negative margins. And in general, we have fairly healthy margins, because one way you can think about it is if you just think about the supply chain for any good, right? Like let's say you're buying like a croissant at the airport or something. That last step where you're actually solving someone's problem, that's where you generally can capture the most margin. And every step along the way, like whoever's enriching the flour or like making the butter or whatever, like you're generally making like a margin on top of the costs of whatever your goods are. And that's why it's nice to be in the application layer, is because what you're building is actually solving the business need. And as a result, you can, capture more of that, because our customers, the way they're thinking about it is like, great, we're investing in Decagon. We don't care that much about what Decagon's costs are. In fact, we probably don't care about at all. What we care about is what is the business ROI that we're getting, right? It's like we're downsizing our operations by this much. We're actually generating more revenue now because the AI agent can engage people and keep them retained. So that is where we probably see the most dynamic here. And I do think this is generally not really a hot take. Like in the early days, people were like, oh, there's like ChatGPT wrappers and so on. And yeah, a lot of wrappers, if it's too thin, it's like not going to be valuable. But if you have enough software built around the models, then that's where you can actually almost capture the most value. That's why I think the OpenAIs of the world will continue to move towards applications, because it's quite hard for them to make money long-term on like their API, for example, because there's like such high competition. All the labs are building, and it's very easy for people to swap. It's not like moving from AWS to GCP is like very hard, but moving from like a OpenAI model to Anthropic model, you just like change like one line of code,
Can you say a little bit more about this ChatGPT wrapper concept? Like my sense is, certainly for what you built, but probably for other companies, that a lot of the work that your engineers are doing is not like AI work. It's traditional software work. It's the ability to hook this system up to enterprise customers. It's good old fashioned like product and infrastructure building that is very different from what OpenAI or Anthropic are providing you. And that's hard work. Like just like building any software system is hard work. And everyone's very enamored of this idea that like in 5 years, I can just show you a piece of software and just tell a coding agent, just like replicate this piece of software. And that's going to mean lower software moats. I don't think you think of it that way. So maybe describe like your thinking or critique of this like ChatGPT wrapper concern that people have.
People say wrapper in a derogatory way. It's like, hey, you're just a wrapper. And yeah, again, it's not black and white. Like, yes, there are a lot of apps that are just wrappers that are not going to become real businesses because like there's just not that much value. I mean, one argument, and again, I don't know too much about this space, but at least from the outside, it has seemed like copywriting, for example, has been difficult because someone can just log into ChatGPT and just like, hey, write this for me, and I'll just write it. So there are things where if there's not enough like tooling and functionality on top of something for it to be really valuable and like needed, then maybe it is easier to just leverage the models. But most of the time, that's not the case. And especially when you get into agents, an agent is not just a model, right? You have to like design it, you have to be able to put in guardrails, you have to be able to teach it how to do new things. And that's where the sort of software layer on top of the models come in. And if that's valuable, then it's just much harder for them to be made obsolete by a model update. I mean, the other side of it is like, okay, well now the labs are quite interested in building applications, right? So they're building a bunch of like coding applications and like Claude Code and so on. And so those will end up being competitors with Cognition or Cursor. And maybe for that reason, it is wise for the coding agents to start training stuff as well. I would say for us right now, at least there's just like sheer amount of like functionality you have to build because it is a very top-down like product is quite large. That has nothing to do with AI. It's just like stuff like, okay, how do you have like observability into like what the conversations are? How do you alert the team if like something spikes? And how are you able to QA and have unit tests for the conversations so that like before you push it out to end users, you feel it's like there's just all this like functionality that's there that doesn't really have anything to do with AI really. And so it's just like a lot of stuff that.
How would you advise other founders thinking about the ideal customers to go after? What are the most interesting qualities of your best customers? Like when you're qualifying them, are they going to be, you have limited time, like you can only serve so many people. I know you're growing really fast, but you can only serve so many customers at any given time. How do you qualify who you want to work with and don't? Like what are the attributes that you've seen matter the most?
Yeah, we want people that are intellectually just like at the leadership level, just like really curious and excited about technology. And you actually see a huge spectrum of that in the enterprise. And some of, in my opinion, the best leaders and like probably the folks that we are most excited to work with, they're just like genuinely like, hey, we want to move on AI as fast as possible. We're very interested and just curious about how all your systems work. And as a result, I'm going to help just like cut through all the just like cruft and like bureaucracy to get something going. And you can actually, I think you can tell that pretty clearly in the first conversation. You can tell if they're like legit about like, this is something where I'm going to both push aggressively, but also give you a ton of feedback and like the feedback's going to be good versus someone where they know it's like a board mandate and it's just like AI is like a thing on their to-do list, basically.
How do you mark milestones in the business? Like, how do you motivate the team? What have you learned about how to rally around a given thing? I know you're super aggressive when you have a customer that you want to get. That it's not just like a old school sales process. It's like an all hands on deck. Send engineers, do whatever it takes. What have you learned about motivating milestones, rallying the team, organizing around common goals?
Yeah, for us, I mean, one thing we do always is we always have like a sort of a flagpole that's within sight that can just kind of rally everyone around it. Having things to rally around are quite helpful. I was kind of thinking about this the other day. I think another type of rallying is around just competition, right? I think when people feel like they're in a battle and there's like clear enemies, then it makes sense to and like again you don't want it to get to the point where people are just like actively like there's like active animosity, but just kind of a healthy level of competition. It kind of ties the team together because there's like, something to focus on. Same thing with milestones. Like if you give everyone a clear milestone, and this can be like pretty insignificant. Like last year we had, for our revenue milestone, we told everyone we'd get them like super nice jackets. And we got like, Decagon Arc'teryx jackets, and everyone was like super excited about that. And if you just think about like
the cost of
the cost of the jacket and just how much people get paid, it's just like trivial. But it just creates like this, hey, we're working towards like these jackets, right? And it brings the teams together because now, like it just feels like everyone's working together towards this common goal. And that's been a big part of our culture, is just finding what is the next milestone.
Anything that we haven't covered about either the business or this exciting, AI applications world that you feel especially passionate about?
I think what has become almost a meme or hyped up a lot in AI startups right now are like a couple things. One, obviously everyone's in person. It's like 996 or whatever. I don't actually think 996 is that healthy. It happens in China and everyone's like super hardcore, but one of the reasons is that like no one has jobs over there. So it's very easy for employers to have leverage. I think here you generally want to maintain a good balance because if you're working super high intensity, you need time to relax a little bit. But that is one element. The other element is the forward deployed engineers. So everyone's talking about forward deployed engineers. I think it's kind of funny because my co-founder came from Palantir, so they actually have forward deployed engineers. What a forward deployed engineer at Palantir means is like you're working on a $10, $25 million deal. And so you're actually just like almost full time working with either one or a small number of customers and like building very specifically for that. I think people are a little bit conflating that with what startups do, which is startups are just very hands-on and do things that don't scale. But for you to actually have a FDE model, you need to have like massive clients, and most people do not have massive clients. So I'm kind of interested to see how that plays out because I do think there's like a over indexing on this like forward deployed engineering model right now, where it's like I have a forward deployed engineer and the deal sizes are like 50K, and that's something we think about a lot as well. Like we are very hands on with our customers. You have to think about like, okay, well, how do we scale quickly, right? If for every, we don't have 50K clients, but if for every 50K client, you have like someone that's like fully staffed to them, that's like impossible to scale, right? Yeah. So you need to find that line in the middle. And I think the full forward deployed model only works with the Palantir approach.
Presumably on this side, you do care a lot about your margins. Like margins, you're much more open about if it's just like LLM cost or something like this. Yeah. But if it's fully baked, like people costs, like that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, it's not even a problem necessarily from the pure dollar margins. It's just like, it just prevents you from scaling. Like, no one can hire good people like that fast, right? Like it's just hard to hire good people. So if your business is fully constrained on good people, then that's also not a good thing.
What do you think the minimum customer size and revenue is to justify a forward deployed engineer model?
Oh, like probably $1 million.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. Well, I think my traditional closing question for everybody, what is the kindest thing that anyone's ever done for you?
I did put a lot of thought into it. I think, so when I was little, like I call it ages, 5 to 13, like elementary, middle school, I was pretty like lazy kid in general. And I think most kids are. There's very few people that are just like intrinsically self-motivated. I wanted to just like play games all the time or just like hang out with friends or like play sports. And my parents had like a very kind of interesting way of raising us, me and my sister. And so what they did was basically when we were really little, it was like an extreme level of like discipline. Like when I was little, I played a lot of piano. It's like essentially like 3-4 hours a day, and then for competitions, like they just pull me out of school and just like go hard at it. And then I guess fortunately for me, my parents decided that like, okay, math was probably a better way to go, and they like, I was just like quite talented at math when I was little, and then even for that, it's just like full force, like you're just committing everything. We did not have TV in the house. We didn't have video games. We didn't really take vacation growing up, and it's just kind of like you're kind of in this mindset of like you're sacrificing like most things to kind of focus on one thing. And when you're a kid, actually, like you don't have no frame of reference, so you don't know. It doesn't feel hard necessarily. It's because your parents are kind of setting up the criteria for you. And I would say in hindsight, I had a very, very happy childhood. But I think that level of just discipline and also just competitiveness is very hard to gain that like after your childhood is over, because when you're in your childhood, your brain's still forming, so it kind of like that kind of forms your personality. I'm very grateful for that, and I think that's also why when I talk about sort of like my generation of like there were a lot of like immigrant parents from my generation that came over for grad school, and then like they're all around my age, and I think this like our crop of folks just are doing very well, partly because of that, like partly because of the upbringing. And then what my parents did, I think, which is the more unique side, is that a lot of times what happens, especially it's like the stereotypical Asian parent, is that just like continues. And you just have like overbearing parents. And I would say even though my parents were very sort of intense about things, they never had any like sort of semblance of like overbearingness. Like they wouldn't like prevent us from like doing things we wanted to do, or like force us to like, hey, you should like pick this or whatever, and so on. And what happened was like towards the end of middle school into high school, I think we had already kind of established these like personalities, and like we've like basically my parents like just pounded a sort of lazy, like wanted to play around kid into someone that was just like very, very driven. And then to their credit, they just like completely like laid off, like, and they don't have any opinions on like what we do for careers and like what we should do. They're like very supportive. You basically just need parents that are willing to spend a ton of time like crafting this childhood for you to kind of develop this. And I think a lot of the things I have in life right now are like from that. So yeah, that's probably the kindest thing. And then it's like my sister as well. Like she was just always try to sacrifice things for me and like for when I was trying to achieve things. And so, yeah. And now we've tried to spend as much time with my parents as possible.
Well, this has been so much fun. I'm so fascinated by the business that you've built and are building. Thanks for explaining it to us and bringing us sort of right to that white hot center in so many different ways. Thanks for your time.
Cool. Thanks for having me.